Good morning.
Scott, would you open us with the order of prayer?
Good morning. Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. I really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us, Representative Oliver. I saw you were up helping testify about mental health with President Biden. Good for you. Yeah, very cool. I'm sure that was fun. So we are going to get started. I'm going to ask Representative Scott Hilton to open us in a word of prayer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's bow our heads. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this beautiful day. We thank you for the men and women in this room today. We pray that you bless them and their families and everything that we do here. Give us wisdom and justice and moderation to make the right decisions that benefit the people of Georgia. We pray these things in your holy name. Amen.
Thank you so much. Well, this morning we have a full agenda, but I do want to start briefly with Marta, Michael Rafshoon is going to give us an update on BRT before we get into our presentation. So please take it away, Michael.
And I might need a little help with this thing. Certainly not the expert here. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, and then I think media services will show it on this.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, either way. Well, thank you all for hearing us today. My name is Michael Rafshoon with MARTA, and there's just a few key points that we do want to reinforce from our last Martoc committee meeting and sort of reinforce why BRT is important and the importance that we really get this right so we can offer a rapid transit service that really benefits all of Atlanta. So a few things we'll talk about is where BRT is in Atlanta, sort of the benefits of having these transit-only lanes, how cameras can be used to enforce the transit lanes, their effectiveness, and then we do want to talk about our pipeline of BRT and why the timeline is super important here. So just a refresher from last committee meeting, a few of the characteristics of BRT. BRT runs in its own dedicated lane. When it is in traffic, it does have traffic signal priority, so it can get around traffic faster. It also includes those enhanced stops that have kiosks, so you can buy your Breeze card off of the bus. Unique branding, you'll see up there in the center. It is the MARTA Rapid, so our buses will be branded as such, and that's the name that we'll be rolling this out at. And essentially, I think just to sort of simplify BRT, BRT is, we want to consider it a train, but on rubber tires. Typically it has a faster frequency than rail. We look at 10 minutes or less, whereas the train is about 15-minute frequencies. It does have a faster implementation time, which is certainly important. It's less expensive than implementing other forms of transit like heavy rail. And it doesn't run on tracks, of course, so it's less permanent and, it's semi-permanent. So if, in the future, it can be changed and manipulated, whereas heavy rail is much more permanent infrastructure. So does anyone know where this picture was taken? It's on the 17th Street Bridge in Atlantic Station. And if you remember, this is where GDOT needed to demonstrate air quality improvements. And so to get this across, there is a bus only lane. You'll see on that where that car is on the far right. However, it's not a dedicated lane. It's not enforced. There's no unique striping. And because of that, cars and pedestrians don't really know how to interact with that dedicated lane. And so for our program for BRT to work in Atlanta, we need to get this right from day one, sort of with a comprehensive communications and education effort to help be able to enforce this lane. And I think all sitting here today, we can all agree that Atlanta Police Department, MARTA, police, and other law enforcement agencies throughout the region, they have more important things to do than be sitting alongside this road ticketing motorists. And so the idea of using automated cameras reduces the reliance on law enforcement and personnel. And this is something else we'll talk about, is that by using cameras and not having a barrier separating that dedicated lane, emergency vehicles, when needed, are able to use that dedicated lane. But of course, the idea is that transit lanes are only for transit vehicles, with the exception of emergency situations and for emergency vehicles. And cameras, in our opinion, is a great way to enforce that without the reliance on law enforcement. And so we do have some data that shows the effectiveness of using automated cameras. Like I said, physical barriers. We've heard a lot of folks say, why don't you put a barrier there? Well, it also restricts emergency vehicles from using that lane. One city that we looked at, and I think we discussed this last time, was New York City. But a couple more data points there is that, we want to make sure that we have an accurate system for patrolling that transit lane. When New York enforced their automated camera system, only 2% of those who contested their violations actually had theirs overturned. So the system that they've looked at is highly accurate. And it's a successful deterrent. Most only get one ticket. Once you get that big fine in the mail, motorists aren't likely to do it again. And this is the last thing I wanted to talk about. So just to sort of refresh where we are now and why it's important that we get this right now. There have been a number of developments in recent years that have brought about this sort of transit expansion. You see in 2014, Clayton County voted to join MARTA through their 1 penny sales tax. And the city of Atlanta in 2016, through the state legislator, allowed the city to implement that additional half penny for their, array of projects. And these jurisdictions have really embraced BRT. This is where the momentum for transit expansion is in the region. And, where we do want to get this right. You'll see our first BRT project will be rolling out in 2025 on Summer Hill, shortly right before FIFA comes to town. And so we really want to set the example for the city, the state, and for the nation that we can do this. We can do it right. And that will sort of enable our other BRT projects to be successful. Clayton County, for instance, on State Route 54, in the city of Atlanta along Campbellton Road, and on North Avenue in the city of Atlanta, and then sort of looking ahead towards Georgia 400 and I-285. So it's important that we get this right now, that we're able to meet our deadline for the World Cup. And we really appreciate y'all listening to us, as well as some of the vendors who can provide some different ways that this technology can be implemented. So thank you.
I think you've got a
Take any
question,
questions.
Michael. Who's 20? Oh, sit again.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Shun said kind of curious, I brought it up at our last meeting and I want to reiterate today. You're taking a lane of traffic that you're going to put a bus in, according to your number, once every 10 minutes. That lane's going to sit empty the whole time. And as much as traffic stalls in Atlanta, how's this good for moving people and freight around the state of Georgia or anywhere in Atlanta, Metro Atlanta? Because for me, that's what we're supposed to be doing is helping transportation, not hurting it.
I absolutely agree. And I think that's a great question. And I think in this stage, so, Atlanta doesn't have a BRT system yet. And I think it's healthy to have some skepticism when it comes to BRT when people haven't experienced it today. And I think that underscores why, for instance, on our Summerhill project, it's really important that once we roll this out, that the project is successful, that people will see that empty transit lane with the bus going through it, and will say, hey, maybe this is a better option than sitting in my car. And so, BRT does require its own, it requires its own right of way. And we think that that is a good thing, because that means that just like the train is unobstructed by traffic, that bus will be unobstructed by traffic. And we do want to encourage people to use our system, to try MARTA, and to really consider this as a sort of a good innovation in the way transit is moving.
Mr. Chairman,
course.
would you mind? So
Sure.
one of the things when I look at, this lane, and you mentioned, that somebody gets a fine for putting a vehicle in that lane, what's the fine going to be, and what's their point of contention if, they had an emergency or they had something going on? How do they appeal that fine? Because I see so many times where constituents reach out to me that for whatever reason, they've gone through one of these speed cameras that have become prolific around the state, and what's going on with those?
Yes, so good question. So as our legislation is presently written, if captured by law enforcement, if a police officer sees someone violating that transit lane, for the first offense, it would be $75. For the second, it would be $100. The third would be $150. If the violator is captured via automated camera, the first offense would be $175, and then $350 for any additional violation for that motorist. And the fees are capped at $25, so not to impose any excessive fees with those cameras. And what I would say in terms of the appeals process is, at the end of the day, the cameras themselves are just a means of collecting evidence that somebody has violated that transit lanes. The same way that a radar gun might capture somebody who's been speeding, you would have a right to contest that violation, the same way that you would have a right to contest the image taken by the cameras. They have to be signed by a certified peace officer, and there would be a system that it would have to go through. But one could certainly, provide counter evidence that they weren't, in fact, violating that transit lane.
Just so you and our committee understands, I would be totally opposed to the way that you've got this set up with taking a lane out of the traffic, and the fines will be prolific. We'll be hearing about that. Because I guarantee you, when somebody's stuck in traffic and they're late, they're running to a whatever type of emergency or meeting it is, they're going to get that lane, and that is not one of the things that I think is treating the public very fairly.
Understood.
Representative Hilton, did you have a question?
Yeah, the senator went right to my question there. Yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around right now. I mean, one of the biggest complaints I get from constituents are the school cameras. Man, they hate those things. Is there any other way that we can kind of keep that as a dedicated lane through kind of a slightly raised median or something? I'm assuming you've looked at other solutions on this rather than, yeah.
Absolutely. So so the other thing that the lanes themselves will be they'll be striped as red lanes.
Yeah.
And so you'll see that they're very much differentiated from the rest of the road.
We have a dedicated HOV lane now on 75, 80, other, and this is, I know that's outside, it's more DOT than. Is it appropriate to add cameras there to ticket folks who hop in on those lanes?
Yeah, that's a whole, thank you,
Okay.
Representative Hilton.
I'm
Colleen
asking you to
Kiernan,
kind of
I'm the
opine, yeah.
Assistant General Manager for External Affairs at MARTA. Just wanted to add a little bit of a color to what Michael's response was, which is first, this is so this won't be everywhere. This is a fairly limited sphere here. And right now, the projects that are advancing are in the city of Atlanta, almost all on city of Atlanta right of way. And so it's a local control choice that the city of Atlanta has made with their right of way that they would like to dedicate a lane on this corridor to be bus only. So that's just one point about, it's not, it's a local control issue, at least in this context.
Does it require a general bill or local legislation?
So we don't, it would require state legislation to do the enforcement. The local jurisdictions don't currently have the authority to use cameras to enforce even on their right of way. So that's really what we're
Only
seeking
CERTA
to
has
do.
that right now.
To your question about could we put a median or a curb or something else? Yeah, we looked at that. Unfortunately, that increases the cost of the project such that, it was, this first project is funded by a pretty small federal grant of $12 million, and the cost of the project is up to $90 million, and doing a full separated barrier the whole way would have increased the cost to a way that was not palatable for the city or for MARTA.
Just last question. Did I hear $175 was the charge? Did I hear that right?
Correct. Again,
Senator-
it's the draft legislation, so that's all up for further discussion.
And happy to work with you.
Senator Dixon.
Yeah, I just had a question. If there was a bill that was passed and signed by the governor, a general bill, would it be then a referendum that would be put out and the citizens of Atlanta would get to vote on that to decide? Or would it just be automatically in law?
So this would essentially be permitting legislation that would allow the local jurisdictions to go to, so once this, assuming this gets passed, it would allow local jurisdictions to be able to go to GDOT and be able to request a permit to be able to operate a camera on their right of way. So no, it would not have to then go to a referendum.
Any further questions? All right, if not, I think we'll move on because we do have a full agenda. I would like to introduce first on the agenda here, Mr. Brandon Long with Hayden AI. Mr. Long, thank you so much for joining us this morning. As you may be aware, we are discussing kind of two different types of cameras in this meeting today. Those that would enforce BRT lanes, and then second, those that would enforce noise. Understand that you represent Hayden AI, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
That's great. And I understand that y'all have currently the, I guess, the agreement with the state to enforce the school cameras, correct?
No, with the school cameras right now, I believe we are, pardon me, my purview is just with what we call ABLE, automated bus lane and bus stop enforcement.
Okay.
So if there's conversations that are happening with on the state level with school buses, personally, I'm not aware of how complete those conversations are yet.
Okay.
But it's very well possible that we're having those conversations.
Okay, great. Okay, please go ahead with your presentation.
Of course. Thank you so much for inviting me today. I really do appreciate the opportunity to be able to come and present our technology to you folks. As you stated, my name is Brandon Long. I lead business development efforts with Hayden AI. What I'm going to be doing today is giving an introduction of our company, talking a little bit about the equipment and the technology that we utilize to be able to enforce these right-of-ways, as well as talking about who we are working with currently. Talk a little bit about some of the legislation that those markets have elected to pass, talk about some of the results of that, and then open it up for a Q&A afterwards. So Hayden AI is a Bay Area tech startup company, and what we do is on the surface, very simple. We put cameras equipped with our proprietary AI on buses so that transit operators are able to identify vehicles that park in bus lanes and in front of bus stops. The idea being that we're increasing operations efficiency as well as accessibility within the markets that utilize our technology so that we can make buses operate for everybody, from commuters down to everyone that is going to end up being reliable or reliant on public transportation so that they can have a safe, efficient way to be able to get from point A to point B. Our technology has several different types of use cases. Right now, I'm going to be focusing this presentation on bus lane and bus stop enforcement, but the nature of our technology allows us to be able to do things like analyze environments for compliance, dynamic digital twinning, asset management, things of that nature. But because of how we're able to contextualize an environment, the use case that we're really leaning heavy into right now is that bus lane and bus stop enforcement, as it does seem to have a very large market need right now. Oops. And then our solution is highly configurable. Every market that we are deployed in has specific rules that their cities and their operators require that we operate within. So what is right for New York City is not going to be right for Los Angeles, is not going to be right for Oakland. And we configure our system specifically for the markets that we are going to be operating within. And then our system is going to be exceptionally accurate as well. As mentioned earlier, any tickets that are going to be issued or citations issued are going to be reviewed by a peace officer. So the accuracy on that end obviously is going to be very high, but the data that we give them beforehand is going to end up being accurate to up to 99%. So what we allow them to do is to sort through the noise and make sure that what they're actually going to be doing is going to be the most efficient process. So the idea, as I said before, is that we are helping transit operators speed up transit. We're hoping, and actually the numbers in New York City are already indicating that transit ridership, where these solutions are deployed, including our solution, is leading to a dramatic increase in ridership, as well as a dramatic increase in safety. And I'll go over some of those numbers at the end of this presentation. As a result, we are seeing lower carbon emissions and healthier environments in which we are operating. So talking a little bit about how we actually do this, it all starts with the hardware set that we deploy on these buses, which is going to be 5 components. The first is going to be a context camera, which is a full color 4K context camera that is mounted in the windshield of the bus, right next to a license plate recognition camera. That is all paired into our compute box, which houses our proprietary AI. And I know a lot of folks have feelings around artificial intelligence. The only thing our artificial intelligence does is turn on the cameras when it indicates that there is a violation in process. And if it actually detects that violation that has happened, it creates the evidence package and then puts it forward to the processor and the peace enforcement officer for them to be able to actually verify that the violation did occur. We have this paired with a GNSS antenna, which is going to pull in several different wireless communication streams to allow for accuracy to within 10 centimeters, so that we can make sure that where the violation occurred is actually where it actually occurred, which is going to be very important in the event that a violation occurs at the very beginning or at the very end of a bus stop or a bus lane. And then we plug into the bus through what's called the J1939 jack, which allows us to be able to take wheel tick speed off of the bus, so that if we enter into what's called an urban canyon environment, we're able to determine where the violation took place based off of the last known location of the vehicle, as well as the wheel speed, so that we can actually, again, get to that 10 centimeters of accuracy. Now, when the system is installed on the bus, we take great pride in making sure that our systems do not interfere with driver operations, do not interfere with bus operations, and completely integrate seamlessly into a bus. Our entire system is completely reversible in the event that we are installed or asked to uninstall. Everything can be put back to exactly as it was factory. Our compute box allows us to be able to mount it in a variety of different positions within the server cabinet, be it upside down or on its side. We're able to take advantage of limited space. And the cameras are going to be tucked up behind the center view mirror in the windscreen, up and out of the way of the driver, so that we don't have any visibility issues. These are actually pictures of one of the pilots that we just finished running in Santa Monica, California, with their Big Blue bus operator. Now, what our system then does is it takes, like I said, that AI-based component to be able to create the evidence package, captures the potential violation, and then pushes that out for review by a peace officer. Again, the goal is going to be to speed up transit and to increase accessibility. And when we are operating within a market, this is actually what we see. So our system, this is how our AI operates. As we're driving through any particular area, or a vehicle equipped with our system is driving through an area, it contextualizes an environment. This allows us to be able to determine where bus lanes are, where bus stops are automatically, and it will allow us to be able to identify vehicles that are going to be parked in that bus lane or in that bus stop, to be able to, again, push that out to a peace officer for them to be able to manually review and determine whether or not a violation actually took place. This allows us to do several different things. Like I said before, asset management is going to be something that we're really going to be moving into development on in the not too distant future. So being able to see things like invisible stop signs, traffic lights that don't work, do a state of good repair analysis on things like sidewalks and bus stops. This is something that we're going to be able to do in the future. But right now we are really leaning into the bus stop and bus lane enforcement, again, from the accessibility component, making sure that this is going to end up doing the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people right now. This particular shot that you're seeing here is actually from a pilot that we ran in Oakland, California. So as I mentioned before, we are currently operating with New York City. We have 500 devices deployed in New York City right now. We just started our project and are deployed in Washington, D.C. as of this last Monday with 150 devices. And Oakland, California with AC Transit has entered into an agreement with us to deploy our devices there as well. We've additionally run pilots with LA Metro, with Big Blue Bus. We're currently running a pilot with SEPTA. We are running a pilot with SAC-RT in Sacramento, and we are installing on a pilot right now for Culver City. This is not to toot our own horn, but this is to say that we are currently the only vendor in the space that actually has a fully functional system that is live in multiple markets, doing both bus lane and bus stop enforcement with internally mounted systems. Pardon me, that was quite a mouthful. The internally mounted system is really important as the cameras that are going to be mounted inside the buses are going to be far more efficient and far more accurate and much less susceptible to any kind of damage due to nature or graffiti than any other systems. So as a result, the press that we've garnered has been very positive. Both Washington, D.C., Santa Monica, SEPTA have all, New York City have all gotten fantastic press based off of the systems that they're deploying. And they're starting to see some real world numbers increases right now in ridership and in rider safety. Some of the legislation that they've elected to pass over the course of the last couple of years in New York, the bus lane and bus stop enforcement program has been so effective that the legislature has recently elected to increase the purview, the scope of their law to be able to include double parking and bike lane violation enforcement as well. Chicago is actually working towards moving towards a pilot as well. They will be doing bus lane and bus stop enforcements through their legislation, as well as bike lane, double parking, blocking intersections, crosswalk, curb cut, fire hydrant, and loading zone, pretty much everything that also involves a safety issue or mobility issue for their constituency. And California in 2020 law passed AB 917, which has some very strict privacy standards and controls in there as well. And they're doing bus lane and bus stop violation as a pilot over the course of the next 5 years before they decide whether or not they want to extend it. Now, the proven results, I think, are pretty fantastic. With New York City, MTA has actually seen an increase of 40% in transit speeds with their bus lane enforcement program. 86% of drivers have not received a second citation, so it does seem to be incredibly efficient in reducing recidivism. And this is one I'm particularly proud of. 34% fewer collisions in routes with automated bus lane enforcement in New York City, as opposed to routes that do not have enforcement, which have actually seen a 12% increase in collisions in the same amount of time. So that is my quick presentation. I'd like to open it up to Q&A. I'm more than happy to revisit any of the slides if you'd like me to as well.
Great. I believe Senator Ginn had a question first.
Thank you, Chairman. Brandon, one of the things that you alluded to was the fines and that you're generating revenue. Question I have is on the locations that you listed where you have those contracts, what's the percentage of that revenue that your company receives for operating the camera system?
That's a great question. We actually don't take any percentage of revenue. We operate on a flat subscription basis. Our goal is not to generate revenue. Our goal is to see transit operators with increased efficiencies.
Give me an example of a prescription, or, how does that work? What does that mean?
Sure. So just a flat subscription, just like if your office were to lease an Office 365 subscription, you're paying off of a per device basis. So if there's 10 buses in a market that are going to end up having equipment from us, we charge on a per device per month basis.
Okay. And one of the things that I saw up there when you go by and like the Frito-Lay truck that you kept playing there, he's unloading if you notice there was a traffic lane, a bus lane, they were going that direction. Where's the guy going to stop and unload? How's he going to get into these kind of places? Metro Atlanta's got a lot of the same crowding issues. You take a lane off for a bus lane. What happens with that ability to get products to the businesses that run this place?
That's also a great question. We defer to the local markets in which we operate to be able to create solutions that are appropriate for their constituency. As I mentioned before, every market is going to be different. So how they handle that is going to be unique based off of what their needs are. And we enforce whatever rules they put forth.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Hilton.
Yep. Just to expand a little bit on, I'm guessing it's kind of a circular equation to some degree. You find them, and then that money is collected by MARTA to pay the subscription. I bet that, and maybe that's more of a MARTA question. Who gets the money? Where does it go? What is it used for? You mentioned privacy. Number one question I had, who owns the data at the end of the day? And how long do you keep it? And where does that go?
Yeah, also a great question. So I'm going to use California as an example because they do have some of the most strict data privacy standards in the country in terms of this enforcement right now. So their requirements are that the data sits with the agency. Agency owns all of the data. We run all of our data through privacy filters, which means that no license plates that are not affiliated with an enforcement are collected and faces are blurred out. So we take privacy extremely seriously. We also only hold on to the data for whatever the legislation requirements are. So if the legislation requirements are, say, hold on to the data for 72 hours until we can determine whether or not a violation took place, that's what we do. We jettison the data. We provide you folks with a receipt that shows the verification of the destruction of the data. And if it does lead to an enforcement action, then we hold on to the data for, again, whatever the requirements are within the legislation. It's typically within a certain time period to actually enforce the adjudication.
That's good to hear because, I feel like we've given up a lot of our privacy rights. I mean, there's cameras everywhere now, and I haven't read the legislation, but I'd be curious if you're blurring out people's faces and stuff like that. I'm guessing it can't be used to prosecute other crimes that maybe the cameras pick up along the way.
No, well, again, that is also deferred to what the local legislation is. Again, with California, they have, and New York City, they have very strict requirements on that. So the data that we collect cannot be used for anything outside of bus lane and bus stop enforcement. And the transit agencies and the DOTs in which we operate with also cannot use that data for anything aside for those two specific use cases. All
right, last question. I thought the camera, it's interesting. It's mounted on the bus itself. Mm-hmm. I thought there'd be cameras along the route. Is there a combination of both, or is this the only, and again, this may be a MARTA question. Do they envision kind of putting it along the route or just keeping it on the buses and using it that way?
I'll defer to MARTA in terms of fixed mount cameras. I can tell you that the benefit of a vehicle mounted camera is going to be the speed of deployment and the cost. Being able to deploy more cameras more efficiently and at a lower cost on buses is typically going to be a better way to be able to enforce these kinds of violations from our perspective. Additionally, if you were to deploy on buses, you're able to enforce a greater area at the specific time when a bus is actually utilizing those lanes. So if you folks are running into complaints of somebody that's using a bus lane when there's no buses, that's not an issue with our product because we have photo evidence that they're actually blocking a bus.
Yeah, Marta, are you able to answer that question?
Colleen Kiernan with MARTA. MARTA is just in the exploratory stage about what we haven't chosen a vendor. We don't have any preference at this point. So we're in sort of a similar fact-finding situation. So at this time, we don't have that answer. And then to your previous question about the revenue. So again, it's not MARTA's right of way in this first project. It's primarily the city of Atlanta's right of way. And so, we would need to develop an agreement with them, but our expectation, again, similarly is we're not interested in generating revenue. We're interested in our transit project working efficiently and effectively. Great. So I would imagine that the city of Atlanta likely would keep the revenue, any revenue, and that because their peace officers would be doing this administrative task of reviewing the violations and issuing the tickets. Thank you.
Let's see. Senator Anderson, you had a question?
It's,
Oh,
it's
I'm
Senator
sorry.
Butler,
Senator
27.
Go ahead.
Excuse me, I have a couple of questions. One being, you had examples of legislation from about 3 states up here, and one had a long list of violations. And I'd be interested to know what was the percentage of those violations before that legislation was passed? Do you have those figures?
So that is going to be, I believe, well, it could have been either the New York City, well, probably Chicago. So Chicago actually has just recently passed their legislation, so they have not actually deployed a pilot as of yet. But we will be working with the city of Chicago on that pilot, and however they decide to make those numbers available, we'll be more than happy to work with you folks on that as well.
I know, but they must have had some numbers or some indication of why they needed to pass that legislation.
So their justification for wanting to pass that legislation is their justification. I don't know exactly why they've decided that this is the right time and why these are the right items that they would like to take a look at. What I can tell you is that the purpose of the pilot is going to be to determine whether or not these issues actually exist for them. So
Mhm.
being able to provide them with the quantitative data that they need to be able to determine whether or not these are issues that they would like to address for their populations, that's going to be the core point of the reason why we're running this pilot.
Okay, and the other question is, I'm sure there are some cities that allow unloading of commercial vehicles. Do you know where those cities are?
I don't know where those cities are. I have heard discussion from some cities that I've spoken with that they would like to address that. And again, that's really going to be one of those situations where we don't interfere with local government. Whatever they decide is going to end up being the best use case for their population is going to be how we end up working with them.
Could Atlanta be one of those cities?
If you folks determine it to be so, we'd love to work with you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Long, for coming today. I appreciate it. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Representative Douglas.
Yes, I've seen this slideshow before. So basically, thank you for presenting. I'm quite sure. I'm sorry for my tardiness, number one. Number two, I've seen this before. So it's pretty much a review for me. The question about the traffic, I have viewed and went to other cities recently within the last 12 months. And I have noticed that the unloading and loading of trucks is pretty much similar to where it is now. They didn't block traffic, in the downtown areas. It's not like the BRT is going to go in the neighborhoods and all through those villages. It's one main street that it goes through. And so the trucks that unload and load down, it won't affect them any differently than it affects us now. Pretty much it will keep the flow of traffic going because there will be less cars on the street. Once people understand that the BRT runs through the vein of each of these cities, and they will be, I would say, we just have to use the tools that we already have that's already in place to make it efficient enough where it will be less cars on the street when they know about this rapid transit. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you for your comment, Representative Douglas. Right. If that's all, again, I thank you for coming. And I think we're going to go forward now with the second presenter, and that is congruent. And I believe congruent, we're going to have Scott Stewart presenting.
Yes, good morning.
He's going to be
Conduit.
online. So if y'all would turn your attention to the screen, they're going to join us via Zoom.
Can you guys hear me okay?
We can. Thank you,
Okay,
Mr. Stewart, for
perfect.
joining us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks very much. Let me share my screen, make sure that you guys can see this. All right, can you see my screen?
Now we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Scott, or Mr. Stewart, you're with Conduent, correct?
I am. I'm with Conduent, and I will talk to you a little bit about who we are and what we do. But let me just first thank you for giving us the opportunity today. Now that we've heard a little bit more about what it is that you guys are trying to accomplish, and then also heard the presentation from Hayden AI, who, by the way, we've partnered with in the past as well. And I would tell you that both systems can work. You know, there was a question about fixed system versus the able system, and both have their advantages. So I think I can speak to that a little bit, as I'm sure Brandon can as well. So anyway, I'm Scott. I'm on the West Coast, so a little bit early for me here today. We've got a couple other representatives here in case there are questions that for some reason I can't answer. But again, very much looking forward to talking to you about what we do and how we might be able to help. So, you know, we'll get into that and also speak to some of the qualifications and why we feel like we're qualified to talk to you today, talk about our Georgia presence, some of our enforcement solutions, and then we'll talk to you about a pilot that we're doing that I believe addresses some of the challenges that you guys are facing. And this pilot is with one of our international clients, and we'll speak to you about what we're doing there. So Conduent, huge company. We're about a $4 billion. We do about $4 billion a year in business in terms of revenue. We are an offshoot, if you will, that happened with my prior employer, Xerox Corporation. We split from Xerox in 2017, and we are now a publicly traded company on the NASDAQ with no longer any affiliation to Xerox. We have about 60,000 employees, and we operate internationally in 23 countries. You can see, don't need to go into the stats on the right-hand side, but we process a ton of images, a ton of violations. We process a ton of payments for our clients worldwide. And we operate in 3 sectors: government, commercial, and transportation. I work in transportation. And in transportation, we have tolling, automated enforcement, parking, and transit services. I think actually there was a question brought to the table earlier about tolling and HOV lanes. I believe one of my colleagues is working at the state level for projects involving toll lanes with the DOT, because we do run some of the largest tolling projects in the country as well. This is just a quick highlight of, again, speaking to the strength of our solutions and services. We run some of the largest enforcement programs in the country, like Suffolk County, where they have 215 red light cameras with a contract to go up to 400. We run the automated work zone enforcement programs with the state of Maryland and the state of Illinois. We run a host of other smaller programs as well, and have installed roughly 900 plus cameras in the last 3 years. Georgia specifically, we do have a couple of offices in Georgia, in Stockbridge and Atlanta, and we support some of the large clients that you see there and some of the things that we do for them. Customer call center, we run human resource services, and we do payment processing for Truist Bank as well. I was surprised to learn we have over 1,100 associates in the state of Georgia with contract values of roughly about $11 million a year. So the next slide, I would say, I don't know why I'm not advancing there. Come on, there we go. So we'll just spend just a minute on this, and I would ask you to pay attention to the left-hand side, even though on the right looks pretty fancy and draws your attention to that rotating camera. But a couple different solution types that we use in most of our enforcement programs. One is LiDAR based. That's the Vitronic Polyscan on the left-hand side. The advantages there is it's really good for high volume, very dense traffic. And in fact, this is the system that we use in our automated work zone speed enforcement programs, because it doesn't have some of the issues like occlusion that's associated with radar. And it's virtually unchallengeable. There have been hundreds of millions of citations issued with this system, and not a single one has been overturned due to a technical challenge. There's over 20,000 of these systems installed worldwide, and we have several hundred here in the United States. And on the right-hand side, this is a system that we use in some of our speed enforcement and red light programs. And you can see it as independently rotatable cameras. The advantage there is, for example, Georgia has legislation to allow for school zone speed enforcement that has been discussed earlier. And because these cameras can rotate independently, you can effectively capture violations in both directions of traffic, let's say eastbound and westbound, with a single system versus what our competitors have to do is put up two systems. I know it sounds like there's some hesitation with things like surveillance, but it has the ability to do that. And I say the ability, you don't have to do that. It can be turned on or off. The advantage is if you have incidents that are occurring near one of these camera sites, you have the ability to go out of enforcement mode and effectively dial into the camera to take a real-time view of what's happening in that situation. Maybe, unfortunately, there's an active shooter situation and you don't have any regular CCTV cameras. You can dial into this camera, you can rotate and tilt the cameras to get a better understanding to help law enforcement make more informed decisions to be able to potentially make that situation better. So, full service vendor, we offer everything. We've been doing it, by the way, for 28 plus years in terms of automated enforcement. And we've been doing some type of ticket processing and business process outsourcing for 50 years. So this is one of our clients internationally that we're running a pilot on. And this is what I'll talk to you about here is a fixed mount solution versus the bus mount solution that you heard from the previous vendor in Hayden. Mexico City's been our customer for quite some time. Mexico City, as you might know, is huge, population of 22 million. In comparison, the largest city in the US is New York at 19 million. I think the population of Atlanta is about 6.1. So they have 4 major transit systems within Mexico City. They do subway, they do cable car, and they have 2 different bus types. So the client that we're working with right now is CDMX Metro Bus. And approximately 4.5 million riders per day ride those 660 buses. So it's a pretty efficient transit system, but one of the challenges that they're having, as are other cities across our country as well, is vehicles are entering these bus lanes and they're creating congestion. And the bus lanes in Mexico City, many of them are actually in the median. And you can see from that picture on the top left, whereas the bus lanes in most cities across the US, they're on the right side of the roadway. So it does create a public safety risk as well, because pedestrians oftentimes cross the street and use that median as a walkway. And of course, it's reducing travel times as vehicles are moving in and out of those bus lanes. And if you see in the picture on the bottom right, it was discussed earlier, can we put in some type of a barrier to prevent vehicles from entering that lane? There's a couple ways to do it. You can stripe the lane just to indicate that it's a dedicated lane, or you can put up small barriers like they did in Mexico City, but that look kind of like curbs or speed bumps. But as you can see from the photo on the right, it is not going to deter every violator. You would have to put up hard fixed large barriers like you might see in the freeway, like Jersey walls, and that is very expensive, but it can be done. And to be frank, that's probably the best way to avoid vehicles entering those lanes. So obviously travel times were being impacted. Vehicles were also hitting buses. So they're cutting buses short essentially and clipping buses. And oftentimes that creates crashes. And those crashes, of course, bring transit to a complete halt. And sometimes they're hitting pedestrians. I believe it was one of the senators asked earlier or had the concern earlier, what are we going to do I'm not sure it's the best idea to dedicate a lane specifically to buses. It's an absolute valid concern, but the population that's impacted the most are essentially low income riders. And the reason for that is because they're the ones that, by and large, use public transportation, and because they don't have cars, right? And so if you are impacting low income riders, and if you're slowing down their travel time, or there's an accident that's created and they literally are getting to work a couple of hours late, they essentially could be fired. So we found that it does disproportionately impact low income folks. Solution that we have, as you can see in that middle picture. So this is a camera that's mounted to or mounted underneath a bus stop shelter. There was, I think, something that was addressed earlier about possible vandalism for fixed mount cameras. This is just the pilot that we're running with Mexico City. The camera could be mounted 15, 18 feet in the air on a fixed mount pole, which essentially eliminates the possibility of vandalism. But for pilot purposes, this is where we decided to mount it. It's a 5 megapixel camera with infrared flash. That means you're getting color pictures in the day and grayscale pictures at night. Again, you could put white flash if you wanted color pictures at night, and that could be solved. ALPR engine detects the violators with a focus on the plate, and if that plate moves into the bus lane, then it can issue a potential violation, but that will depend upon whatever the legislative guidelines are. And then you can go even further with specific client business rules if you want to further restrict when you can and cannot issue a violation. And then we also can run it against whitelists. So what that means is you can have the jurisdiction or transportation agency can provide a list of plates that should not be detected. We have a full back-end system, a full back-end violation processing system that we can run those plates against. And if it's an emergency vehicle, of course, you don't want to issue a violation. Theoretically, you could not issue violations for vehicles that were loading and unloading. And because this camera is fixed mounted, it's going to have a view of that specific area of the bus lane 24/7. So one of the advantages was mentioned before about the advantages of having a mobile-based system is speed of deployment and cost, and that's true. But if you do have a mobile system, what you cannot detect is vehicles that are violating the lane when the bus isn't there, if the system is mounted on the bus. So one of the advantages of having a fixed mount system is you can detect violators 24/7, regardless of whether a bus is there or not. So just some initial results, and I would tell you that this client in Mexico City, and by the way, we do fare collection for the transit agencies in Mexico City. So think of tap card users when you jump on the bus and you tap your card, and that represents your form of payment. But we're basically sending the data to them, including the images. They at this point have not asked us to process violations. But just a snapshot in time, we installed this pilot in March of this year, and they were getting a little over 200 violations per day. And we did a data pull for a day in June last month, and it went down to 164. So it's a 24% reduction. And I would tell you that because they don't have a fully functioning back-end system in place right now, because they haven't asked us, they're very selective on the amount of violations that they're issuing. So if they were issuing to every violator, then we anticipate that reduction would be significantly higher. And in fact, most of our enforcement programs, we see reductions of 40 to 50% within the first 6 months. The ALPR accuracy is pretty good right now, as you might imagine. Some of the plates in Mexico were getting damaged or dirty plates, and that's accounting for most of the misreads, if you will. And then finally, some additional use cases that have been talked about but not fully vetted yet. Because we also manage the tap card for these clients, we could potentially count, because they're mounted at bus stops, we could count the number of users theoretically that are onboarding those buses, and then cross-reference those against the number of paid fares, and they could see where the discrepancies are and potentially make decisions. Maybe they're going to randomly put enforcement officers on the bus to prevent people from loading the bus for free. So that's one example. Also can measure the time to load at each bus stop. Is it specific to engineering issues at that particular bus stop? Are some drivers more efficient than other drivers, and so forth? And then some other things that the camera can do that aren't even mentioned here, like it can identify vehicles by make, model, and color. So if you have an incident like an Amber Alert, for example, and nobody got a plate read, but they knew it was a blue Chevy Cobalt, which I think is that car in the bottom right, you'd be able to do a search in your system to determine if a blue Chevy Cobalt passed the bus at that time. So I think that's all that I had from a presentation standpoint, and I want to pause there and just take some questions. And let me make a couple comments if I could too, since the legislation is simply proposed and not yet passed. What I would tell you also, and potentially recommend, if the fine amounts that are in the legislation today are $175 and $350, I would say that that's relatively high. Although in Mexico City, it's between 4,000 to 6,000 pesos, which when you do the conversion is $240, which is shocking to me that the fine amount is that high. When you have higher fine amounts, typically what it leads to is a higher rate of adjudication, which can bog down the courts. You oftentimes can get the same level of impact by having lower fine amounts. Maybe it's a $50 fine for the first, for the first notice, and for the second time violators, it's a $100 fine. So just a suggestion with, I've been in this business for 9 years, and these are some of the things that I've learned. One other thing that I would say is where a question was asked about where do the funds go? If you do decide to have a program in the future, you have the ability to if it's not already pre-directed based on the state legislation, hopefully you'd have the ability at the jurisdictional level to say, hey, we're going to put these funds over and above what it takes to run the program. We're going to put these funds to address transportation and public safety issues. Maybe you put those funds to engineering projects in the future where you maybe can put up those fixed barriers. And maybe 5 to 10 years into this project, you've created enough revenue where you're able to fund these engineering projects where maybe you don't need cameras in the future. So just a couple of suggestions from my end. I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
All righty. Thank you so much, Mr. Stewart. You do have a question from Mr. Senator again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I noticed on your first slide, I think you had a number of your revenue generated was $160 billion. When I look at that and I think about, okay, the Georgia lottery's been in existence for now 30 years, and it's generated about 26.5 billion. When I look at maybe it was 125 billion. I'm sorry. But for me, that's a huge tax burden fee for motorists using public right of way. And I'm astounded at where this thing wants to go and what you want to do to adversely impact the public.
Yeah, so
I don't know how long a time period that is, and it keeps popping on and off the screen up on one of them, but
sorry, hopefully I'm showing it now. So I'm sorry, let me be clear. So we are a company, we're a business process outsourcing company that does business in more areas than just transportation. For example, we do EBT card transactions. So, let's say that deadbeat dads are not paying child support. We help as one of the providers that can garnish wages to get those funds to mothers in need, let's say. So that $125 billion of payment transactions encompasses all of the lines of businesses that we do, and certainly not just public safety or even transportation. So I apologize if that was misleading.
More questions? I have a question, Mr. Stewart. Would y'all be willing to do a pilot program where we could try this on and see if it fits?
Sure, anything's on the table. We'd love to have that and continue that conversation with you and discuss that possibility. Absolutely, we're certainly open to that.
And how would that work in terms of, contracting, and how would that work?
Yeah, so first of all, since it's not legislatively allowed today, it would be a pilot essentially to collect data. You could potentially do something where we could send out warning notices, and we could discuss compensation associated with that and what the contract would look like. You would own all the data, so we'd give you access to the system. So we could pass on what looked like potential violations to you, and then a representative or representatives from the transit agency would determine if a warning notice, let's say for example, could be sent out, and then we could track the data to see if there's any drop in violators. I will tell you that I've been personally involved in other red light and speed pilots in the past, and it's great. It's a great project to do, to collect data to determine if you actually have a problem, but you have to set realistic expectations. If the expectation is to curb the behavior by just sending warning notices, it doesn't work. Driver behavior does not change unless they are pulled over by a law enforcement officer, which I'm a big advocate of, but I am also a realist. And I think, and it was said earlier, there just aren't enough. And with the limited resources that they have, they generally focus on more important issues, let's say. But if you don't send them a notice that has a financial penalty associated, and it's just a warning notice, drivers eventually get it, and they continue, unfortunately, using, they continue with the bad behavior. But yeah, we could talk about how you'd want to set up a pilot and the scope of that pilot, but sending out warning notices and doing data collection are a couple of the components that could be done. And by the way, Mexico City, the pilot, they're only doing it at one bus stop right now. So it's pretty limited in scope in terms of their approach. But as you can see, they got 200 violators a day at the beginning of the pilot.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Stewart, and all this information, and we will certainly keep this in mind.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We are going to move on. We have actually an international person with us today from England. Mr. Ruben Peckham is here with Intelligent Solutions, and he is going to talk about noise reduction cameras and enforcing noise ordinances.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Before I start, I'll just say, obviously I speak funny compared to everyone else here. So if I go too fast or you can't understand me, please interrupt me and I'll clarify anything. And also my apologies. I'm doing a tour of the east side of the US this week, and I picked up a cold on the way, so I'm probably going to sniffle my way through this. So apologies in advance again for that. So anyway, yeah, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our noise camera technology. Obviously, it's very new and it's quite novel. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story, really, about how it's come about. Like many other things in life, it wasn't really something that we planned, and it's something that's happened. So like a lot of the best things in life. But just very briefly, in terms of who we are and our history, we're based in the UK. We're in the city of Southampton, which is about an hour south of London. And we run a consultancy business, especially we're engineers in noise and vibration. And our work is sort of in the built environment, infrastructure, airports, industry, etc.
Ruben,
Architecture.
could you move a little closer to the mic?
Sorry, how's that?
There you go.
Okay. So yes, we work in the built environment as consultants in noise and vibration and acoustics, and we've been established about 20 years. We work in the wind. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. We work in the wind turbine industry, and there's a particular characteristic of wind turbine noise, which is when the blade passes the tower, it makes a whooshing sound, so that it goes whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. That's normal, but sometimes that whoosh becomes a bang, and if you live near that particular wind turbine or wind farm, it can be very disturbing. And we're getting instances in the UK where wind turbines, wind farms are being shut down because of it. So as consultants, a decade ago, we wrote an algorithm to quantify that bang, that whoosh, that bang, to help our wind turbine customers. And we then went out to the market to try and find a noise monitor that would be able to implement that algorithm, and nothing existed. So we decided to build our own. So that's how we got into making instrumentation. So 10 years ago, we started making noise monitors specifically for that application. We called it an intelligent noise monitor. So that was through our core business, which is 24 Acoustics consultancy business. And we've sort of evolved from there. And we make all kinds of different instrumentation now, of which the noise camera system is one. And a noise camera is maybe analogous to a speed camera. So it's used to detect excess sound from motor vehicles. Okay, so the concept, like I say, it wasn't planned, it happened. It started in London. So there's a region in London, Kensington, Chelsea, very, very wealthy part of London. And they have a particular issue with noise from supercars. So people driving Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Porsches, quite often late at night, in residential areas, and driving them aggressively. So not driving them normally, not sort of pulling away from the lights and, just driving away normally, but over revving, deliberately racing, and causing a nuisance and disturbing the people that live there. So the council there approached us and said, was there a technical solution to this? And what we did was we took the noise monitor that we'd already developed for our wind turbine work. We put cameras on it, we reprogrammed it, we recoded it, and we tested it, and it became the first noise camera. That was 2019. We spent a year trialing it, and then we had COVID, obviously. And once that had kind of died back a little bit, then we tested the first two in London in September 2020. So we did a 3-month pilot in London, 2 systems for those 3 months, and those 2 cameras are still there. So the pilot became permanent. They said in those 3 months that they fined about 100, they issued about 160 fines, and they had no repeat offenders. So at that point, that was all successful. That's how it looked at that time. So we basically have a microphone, 2 cameras. Cameras are 180 degrees to each other, looking up and down the street. Pretty simple, to be honest, at that stage. Now, here's a little bit of video. Hopefully the audio will work with this. This is from a BBC show. It's about 3 minutes long. And it just basically gives a bit of context. So it talks about the system in London, the systems in London, and also the effect that excess noise can have on people's health. So I'm going to play this and hopefully.
Now, if you live near a busy road, you might be familiar with this sound. Not only annoying, it can also impact your health.
Yeah, but brand new technology is now putting the brakes on noisy cars, as Lindsay Russell found out.
If you live in a bustling town or city, your ears might be regularly exposed to loud noise.
But there's one sound that's really grinding the gears of people up and down the UK: noisy cars and motorbikes. And as someone who lives on a really busy road, I know a thing or two about the stress and anxiety that can cause.
The police can find drivers who cause a nuisance with too much noise, but it's not easy to gather evidence. So the big question is, how do you stop it?
Well, you've seen speed cameras. This is the new kid on the block, a noise camera.
The first 5 cameras to be installed in the UK are in London's Kensington and Chelsea, where they've had problems for years with owners of high-performance cars showing off their noisy engines.
We've seen people bringing cars into the area that have very loud exhausts, revving the vehicle, driving in a very noisy manner.
So how do these actually work?
So you've got a microphone and a couple of cameras. When the microphone detects a breach, it records the video, and then an officer will review it to make sure that there is an offense that they can issue a ticket for. We've had over 116 decibels recorded by one of these cameras. That's the equivalent of a chainsaw or a helicopter being right next to your ear, well above what they're legally allowed to make. Of our sort of 400 tickets that have been issued, we've only had very few that are repeat offenders. So clearly the message has sort of got through that if you're going to make this noise, this isn't the place to do it.
With the success in London, the government is pledging to invest £300,000 towards more of these cameras for England and Wales's noisiest streets. Tim Morsom reckons this street near where he lives in Leeds should be one of them.
You can see the tire marks in the road. You know, this is where people are coming down here late at night, doing donuts in the road, or sometimes it's used as a racing strip or a drag strip.
As well as drag racing, Tim says it's the modified exhausts that really raise the decibel levels.
They hugely increase the volume of the cars. It's, you know, really powerful growl, really, really loud, enough sometimes to make your windows shake. This noise can happen 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It really affects people's lives.
Frequently disrupted sleep can have a serious impact on our health.
Your brain has a awakened reaction to loud noises, which means when this happens, it increases the adrenaline and the cortisol hormones in your body, and it can cause a spike to your blood pressure and your heart rate.
So you're not actually resting or sleeping as well?
No, you're not. And that can affect your mental and your physical health. You're more likely to have anxiety, depression, high blood pressure, and even heart disease.
For Tim in Leeds, a camera could make all the difference.
It's really important for us to get this sorted. We're tired of having our sleep disrupted. This is a quiet, nice area and should stay that way. And so we need to do something about it.
It's going to be interesting to see if that kind of technology makes a difference, I think.
Okay, so hopefully that just provided a little bit of background and context to what we've done in London. So this happened in London, and basically the word got out at that point, and we were then contacted by the Department for Environmental Protection in New York City, and they trialed a system 2 years ago, piloted a system for 2 years, and they have just increased that now. So we've just delivered a further 9 systems to them. So they have 10 permanent systems there now. We have 12 permanent systems in London at the current time. We have 3 on a long-term trial in Miami, which looks like they're going to go on to become permanent. We're about to start a trial in California. We've just completed a trial in Israel. And it's fair to say we have very significant interest from a lot of places, particularly in the US. So this week, I've been to Westchester, north of New York on Monday. I was in Philadelphia on Tuesday. Yesterday I was in Knoxville. Tomorrow I'm in Naples and Miami. And after that, I'm allowed to go home. Yeah, there really is a lot of interest. And in response to feedback that we had from New York, so New York have been a really, really good partner for us. So they've really trialed the system very, very aggressively, really. So the one pilot system they had, they moved all around the city over a period of 2 years. They put it in a van, et cetera, and gave us lots of feedback on in terms of further features that it would need. So we launched then in February our 2nd generation system, which we now call SoundView. And this has a little bit of additional hardware. I don't know if the cursor will work. No, it doesn't. But it's the circular or the oblong shaped disc on the top, which is a microphone array. So within that, there's a fisheye lens, which is a wide angle lens in the center, and there's 4 little tiny microphones in the corners. It's quite large. It's about this kind of size, and we call it a halo actually because it sits sort of above the road like a halo, looking down onto the street. And what that does is, and here it is in situ in New York. What it does is this is quite clever. This is the clever bit of the whole system, really. The 4 microphones detect the dominant noise source. So if we have 3 or 4 or more than one vehicle in the image, it will tell us which is the noisy one. And the way it does that is that the microphones obviously are spaced apart, and the sound from the dominant vehicle hits each microphone with a tiny, tiny delay. It measures that time delay, and from that it can triangulate the location of the noise source. And what it does is it places a red dot on the vehicle, on the offending vehicle, and then we have LPR sensors in the cameras at the bottom there. The red dot then tells the LPR where to focus, and it reads the license plate, and the user can take action as they see fit. So here's another little bit of video. I won't bore you with too much video. This is the deputy.
I'm going to talk a little bit about noise
in
cameras.
New York City.
Keeping New York safe also means protecting our quality of life. And managing noise pollution is a core part of DEP's mission. We get 45,000 311 complaints a year. It's the most of any category that we get. And many of those issues are the result of illegally modified mufflers. So starting in June 2021, we started a noise camera program. It's a cost-effective way of us and a very innovative way of us trying to mitigate that noise. So how does it work? We pair a camera with sound meters, and they're able to pick up any noise that's detected above 85 decibels, 50 feet away from the camera. And then they are able to zoom in and get the license plate of the camera, of the vehicle rather, and then we're able to issue a summons. We go through the video, and actually we have an example here to show you what it looks like, if you want to cue that up. The red dot you'll see in the video is actually following the car making the noise.
Oh, no.
So that registered above 85 decibels. Just for some context, 85 decibels is about as loud as a lawnmower, which is pretty loud if you're trying to sleep. We set up a fine schedule, and the fine is, and it's quite steep. It's $800 for the first offense, $1,700 for the second offense, $2,500 for every offense after that. So there's a real motivating factor to not get a summons in this particular case. I think of them like speed cameras, but for noise. And so far we've had one camera that we've been piloting all around the city. It's been tremendously effective in the number of potential complaints that we've seen. That's most of it.
So when is the plan? What's the plan to have the second camera and the third camera out? Do we have a projection of when we can expect to see more cameras that's out there?
Yeah, we sure do. These have been tremendously popular. Many council members have been asking for them in their districts. We plan to have an additional 7 cameras by the end of the year.
You know, it's interesting, when I first took over in this job, I went around and I meet with a lot of elected officials, and one of the council members in Manhattan actually brought this up to me and said that it was his office who was the one who had pushed this legislation. So this is, once again, if the information is correct, it was actually spawned by a city council member. But just really important to the public out there, the objective here is not to write summonses, it's to correct behavior, right? So it's just a tool of writing summonses. They are steep, and it should, I mean, I would imagine that most people would want to avoid those summonses. But part of it is education and getting the word out there, because it is very, it's not good for the environment to have the cars who are riding by with some of these noise, the word commission.
Okay, yes, so the fines in New York are pretty steep. We don't set the fines. So I think I probably touched on how it works, but it records audio, precision, accuracy, noise level, and it's not me, is it? No. Okay. So yeah, it records audio, precision, accuracy, noise level. The precision, accuracy, noise level is really important because obviously it's being used for law enforcement. So the microphones that we use are certified as Class 1 accuracy, which is defined by an international standard, and that's actually as accurate as you get outside of a laboratory. Obviously, really important in the event of of legal challenge, etc. And also, so record all of that and video in 2 directions all of the time. It also erases all of the time as well, unless it triggers. And it has algorithms that trigger, so it triggers on muffler sound, which is the main source. It triggers on a horn, and it triggers on music. And we're also working on an algorithm at the moment for Jake breaks as well. So when it triggers, it records a 14-second clip of audio and pushes it up into the cloud. And the user basically then, the data will all fall out automatically. It reads the license plate, etc. So, a caution or a fine or whatever, or a citation can be issued. But equally, the user can log in to the system via a web interface and look at the data and review it and take a view on how they and what they do with it. And what I've got now is a couple more videos. These are video screenshots. So this is what you see as the user. So it's a video screenshot showing the front end of the system. So what we've got here, this is one of our sites in Miami. So at the top, the two images at the top are the main sensors on the main cameras. So one is looking up, if you like, east and west. The darker images are the LPR sensors, and then the central image at the bottom is the fisheye lens. And you'll see on that lens, as the vehicles pass, you'll see the little red dot tracking the dominant vehicle. What you'll see after that is it'll scroll down, and there's a graph underneath which shows the noise level, which is in time with with cursor moves in time with the video. And then at the bottom, there's a summary showing the noise level and the reading the license plate and all that kind of stuff. I'll just play it, and I'm sure it'll become clear. I'm sorry, the video is slightly staggered. But yeah, hopefully it's clear. It's the near side vehicle that is making the sound, and it's identified with the red dot. And there's the license plate, which is nice and clear. And then at the bottom here, so the license plate has been read automatically. And this actually shows up above that the peak noise level there was it was 109.6 dBA, which is it's pretty loud. Okay, so that's the first example. The second one is the same site, but this is at night, so it's in poor light. Okay. And that is pretty much it from me. Happy to take questions as you see fit.
Questions? Well, I have a question. Are you as flexible as these other companies in terms of contracting or doing the pilot programs and that sort of thing? Or
are we? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So we're starting a pilot in California in September. We've just completed a pilot in Israel, and we're talking to a number of cities about pilots in the next few months. Yeah, so absolutely.
And you adjust, I guess, per the jurisdiction to the rules. You're willing to adapt to their rules there and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, most of the jurisdictions tend to have an ordinance which defines a fixed noise level at a fixed distance. The noise levels tend to vary a little bit, so the limits, if you like, tend to vary a little bit between the different territories and jurisdictions. What I didn't say actually is we tend to mount our systems on lampposts because we can. It's a cheap and easy, effective way of doing it because we can tap the power off the lamppost. So sometimes, if you have a noise limit which is 75 decibels at 50 feet from the center of the road, then sometimes the lamppost isn't at the right distance, but we can correct for that. It's generally working, and that's what we're doing in New York.
That's great. And do you work on a subscription basis also, or?
We can do. We either sell outright or we rent.
Okay. And the renting, I guess, would be like the subscription model.
It's similar to that, yeah.
Okay.
And we don't take any revenue from the fines.
Okay. And I think I have a question from Representative Hilton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one of the videos may have answered this, but again, going back to kind of privacy concerns, how sensitive are the cameras and can they pick up casual conversation along the street?
I mean, they would pick up casual conversation, but they're erasing continuously. So, and the reason they erase continuously is at the point that they trigger, you've missed a proportion of the event. So, the data that is saved, the 14-second clip, will be dominated by the sound from the vehicle. So it won't pick up conversation.
But it would, but it would delete.
Yeah, in a trigger event, i.e., the event that's saved, there won't be audible. Discernible conversation wouldn't be audible. At other times, it would pick it up, but it's erased continuously.
No, each municipality probably sets a different decibel triggering event. What is on average kind of the minimum decibel that triggers a violation? And what does that equate to? I think somebody mentioned a lawnmower.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that first clip I showed you was 110 decibels, which is really high. I would say certainly I think in Knoxville, I was in Knoxville yesterday, their ordinance is 85 at 50 feet. You'd probably push it a little bit above that. So you might set it, say, to 90. So there's a sort of, margin of error in there. And 90, well, okay, 85 in the UK, if that's continuous over an 8-hour period, that is in an industrial situation, in a workplace, so, a mine or a factory, that's the minimum level that hearing protection has to be provided and worn by law. So at that level, it's potentially damaging to hearing if it's a continuous level over an 8-hour day.
These tend to be quick events.
That's right. Yes, they're impulsive. They are quick events. Yeah.
Does it equate? What does an 85, 90 equate to a lawnmower, or what's a real?
If you're close enough, yes, yeah. So yeah, I mean, if you're behind a lawnmower pushing it, it's probably going to be less than 85. Yeah.
Okay. I saw some of the images had kind of a work guys out there, construction. I assume all those would be exempt if you're operating a jackhammer. We're not.
It won't. The algorithms that detect they're a combination of a bit of artificial intelligence and just algorithms that we've written based on the character of the sound. So it won't trigger on anything other than sound from mufflers, horns, or music.
Got it. Thank you.
I can add to that. 30 decibels is considered a whisper. 130 decibels is considered a hearing damage level. 95 is a motorcycle. If that gives you some range as to what it is. Does that help?
Mm-hmm. In terms of the music, Ruben, I guess you can hear the music. It's only music that you can hear outside of a car, obviously, that's just too loud if someone's blasting rap music.
Inside or out. Yeah, inside
or out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about loud parties?
Yeah. It's just a question of coding. Yeah. I mean, it can be done.
Because we've had a problem with party houses in the city of Atlanta.
Okay.
And would just be curious if it would also.
Well, it would probably be a different product that we'd use, but yeah, we have nuisance monitors that with or without a camera that can, again, detect music.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Senator Gunn?
When you mentioned that those devices are recording and they can hear voices, conversations, whatever, a lot of states, Georgia's not one of them, but a lot of states have to have two-party consent. And I know New York is one of those two-party consents. So you're violating the law when you do this, when you set one of these things up automatically.
I can't answer that. I mean, I don't. I can't pretend to understand the different laws in the US.
When you two-party consent means that if me and Scott are having a conversation,
I understand
we both have to consent. You've interjected a device that's listening to us that we didn't consent to, so you're automatically violating the law. I think these things are an invasion of privacy.
Well, as I said, it doesn't record voices. It has the capability to, but it doesn't record it. I can't see how it's any different to a Ring camera, to be honest.
I mean, I'm like, it's a circle.
It's about improving quality of life. You know, it's not about spying on people. It's about improving the quality of life for people that live in areas where boy racers kind of do their thing.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming so far. And
Thank
we
you.
hope
Thanks
you
for
have
having me.
a wonderful time in Atlanta and a great time in the US. Thank you. Yeah. Another question. I'm so sorry.
No, I didn't question. I just wanted to know about the sex.
That's fun. That's fun. All right. Well, I think that's all that we have today. I really appreciate everybody coming. We're finishing a little bit early. But if you have any additional questions, I'm sure everybody will stick around and be glad to answer additional questions. So we are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Good to see you, Senator.
Just